The Terracotta Army was not built by art alone. It was built by taxes, forced labor, grain extraction, and one of the most powerful state machines in ancient history. When people think about the Terracotta Army, they usually think about statues, thousands of clay soldiers, an enormous underground army, an archaeological wonder. But the real story is far bigger, because the Terracotta Army was not just an artistic achievement, it was an economic achievement, a political achievement, a financial achievement. It was the result of a state powerful enough to organize millions of people, extract massive resources, and transform an entire society into a machine of imperial control. This is the hidden economic history behind the rise of the Qin Dynasty. And to understand it, you need to start before the empire even existed. Before China was unified, the region was divided into competing kingdoms during the Warring States period. These states fought constantly. War required soldiers, soldiers required food, food required taxation and organization. Over time, competition forced states to become more efficient. The state that organized resources best often survived longest. Among these states, Qin transformed faster than the others, not because it was richer, but because it became more organized. This transformation accelerated under reforms associated with Yang. His reforms changed how the Qin state operated. Power became centralized. Local aristocrats lost influence. The state gained direct authority over land, taxation, and households. This was revolutionary. Before this, many ancient states depended heavily on noble families, but Qin built something different, a bureaucratic state. Officials replaced hereditary elites. Laws replaced personal loyalty. Administration became systematic. This increased state capacity dramatically, and state capacity is one of the most important concepts in economic history, because wealth alone does not create power. The ability to organize wealth creates power. The Qin state became extremely effective at measuring land, registering households, collecting taxes, and mobilizing labor. Every household mattered, every farmer mattered, every grain harvest mattered. Now look at taxation. In the modern world, people think of taxes mostly in money, but in the ancient world, wealth often meant grain, labor, livestock, and transport capacity. Grain fed armies, labor built infrastructure, transport moved supplies. The Qin state extracted all of these aggressively. Farmers paid taxes through agricultural production. Peasants could also be conscripted for military service or massive construction projects. This allowed the state to accumulate enormous resources. Now consider what this meant. The Qin state could sustain larger armies than rivals. It could build roads faster. It could move troops more efficiently. It could maintain stronger logistical systems. In warfare, logistics often matter more than bravery, and Qin understood logistics better than most ancient states. Road systems expanded, administrative networks expanded, communication improved. This created a powerful cycle. Better organization increased extraction. Better extraction increased military power. Military victories expanded territory. Expanded territory increased resources. This cycle pushed Qin toward domination. Eventually, under Qin Shi Huang, Qin unified China. But unification was only the beginning, because conquering territory is easier than controlling it. Now the empire needed administration on an entirely different scale. This is where standardization became critical. The Qin government standardized writing, weights, measures, currency, road systems, axle widths for carts. At first glance, these changes seem technical, but economically they were transformative. Standardization reduces friction. It makes administration easier. Trade becomes more efficient. Tax collection becomes more reliable. Transport becomes faster. The empire becomes more governable. This is one of the most important lessons in financial history. Strong states do not rely only on force. They rely on systems. Now think about roads. Roads are not just infrastructure, they are instruments of state power. They move armies, they move grain, they move officials, they move information. The Qin state invested heavily in these systems because control depends on movement. Now look at the emperor's mausoleum. The scale was extraordinary. According to historical records and archaeological estimates, hundreds of thousands of laborers may have worked on the complex over many years. Clay soldiers, weapons, bronze chariots, underground chambers, massive earthworks. This required immense coordination. Materials had to be gathered, workers had to be organized, food had to be supplied, transportation networks had to function continuously. The mausoleum was not simply a tomb, it was proof of state capacity. It showed what centralized power could command. Now consider labor. Most workers were not wealthy artisans working freely for artistic expression. Many were conscripted laborers. Some were prisoners. Others were peasants fulfilling obligations to the state. This reveals another economic truth. Monumental projects often shift costs downward. The glory belongs to rulers. The burden falls on ordinary people. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout history. Now examine the role of law. The Qin system relied on strict legal enforcement. Punishments were severe. Compliance was expected. The state demanded productivity and obedience. This created efficiency, but it also created fear. And fear can produce results quickly, but it also creates fragility. Now look at the Terracotta Army itself. Each soldier appears unique. Different faces, different expressions, different ranks. But beneath the individuality was a standardized production system. Parts were manufactured in organized processes. Heads, arms, torsos, and legs were produced systematically and assembled. This resembles industrial organization long before industrialization. Division of labor increased efficiency. The system combined craftsmanship with administrative coordination. Again, organization created scale. Now think about real wealth. Modern societies often measure wealth through money and financial assets. Ancient empires measured wealth differently. Land, food production, population, labor capacity, transport systems. These were the foundations of economic power. The Qin Empire mastered these foundations. Now consider military finance. Large armies require continuous supply. Weapons must be produced. Troops must eat. Roads must function. The Qin system extracted enough resources to sustain one of the strongest military structures of the ancient world. This allowed rapid expansion, but expansion carries costs, and this is where the story changes, because systems built on extreme extraction often become unstable. The same machinery that creates power can also create resentment. Heavy taxation created pressure. Forced labor created suffering. Strict laws created fear. Over time, ordinary people carried enormous burdens. This is one of the deepest lessons of empire. Strong states can organize society effectively, but over-extraction weakens legitimacy. Now look at what happened after Qin Shi Huang died. The dynasty collapsed surprisingly quickly. Despite immense power, despite military strength, despite administrative sophistication, the empire became politically fragile. Why? Because control through pressure has limits. The system extracted too aggressively. The state became feared more than trusted. This is a recurring pattern in economic history. Powerful systems often appear stable until pressure becomes too heavy. Then collapse happens rapidly. Now step back and examine the larger meaning. The Terracotta Army represents more than ancient art. It represents centralized extraction. It represents administrative power. It represents the ability of a state to organize land, labor, and law into a unified machine. This is why the project still matters today, because modern states also depend on organization. Tax systems, infrastructure, bureaucracies, supply chains, data systems. The tools changed, the principle did not. Now think about the relationship between money and power. Money alone cannot build empires. Organization builds empires. The ability to coordinate millions of people, the ability to extract resources consistently, the ability to enforce rules across vast territory. That is real state power, and Qin China became one of the earliest and clearest examples of this phenomenon. Now consider standardization again. Even today, modern economies depend on common systems, shared measurements, shared currencies, shared legal frameworks, shared infrastructure. These systems reduce friction and increase scale. The Qin Dynasty understood this more than 2,000 years ago. Now think about monuments throughout history. Pyramids, walls, palaces, canals. These projects often symbolize greatness, but they also reveal something deeper. They reveal how much labor and wealth a state can command. The Terracotta Army reveals one of the most powerful command systems of the ancient world. Now examine another important insight. Economic systems are never neutral. The same state capacity that builds roads can also enforce oppression. The same administrative efficiency that improves coordination can also intensify extraction. This dual nature exists throughout history. Strong systems create opportunity, but concentrated power creates risk. Now connect this to modern economic systems. Today, governments still rely on taxation, administration, and infrastructure. Modern states register citizens, track economic activity, manage transportation networks, coordinate large-scale systems. These capacities create stability and prosperity, but debates over state power continue for the same reason they existed in ancient times, because centralized systems can both help and burden society. Now return to the Qin Dynasty. Its rise changed Chinese history permanently. Even though the dynasty itself was short-lived, many structures survived. Centralized administration, imperial bureaucracy, standardized systems. These shaped future dynasties for centuries. This is another important lesson. Sometimes short-lived empires leave long-lasting systems. Now think about why the Terracotta Army fascinates people today. It is massive, detailed, mysterious. But beneath the visual spectacle lies a much deeper story. A story about economics, a story about labor, a story about taxation and organization, a story about the machinery of state power. If you want deep insights into economic history, empire, money, and the hidden systems shaping civilizations, subscribe to The Financial Story. We break down complex historical systems into clear explanations that help you understand how power really works. Now return to the central question. What built the Terracotta Army? Not just clay, not just artistry. It was built by grain extraction, tax systems, forced labor, administrative control, standardization, and one of the most powerful state machines of the ancient world. The Terracotta Army was not only protecting an emperor in death, it was displaying the full economic power of an empire in life. The Qin Dynasty proved that strong states can achieve extraordinary things. They can unify territories, build infrastructure, standardize economies, mobilize millions. But history also shows the danger of excessive extraction. When systems demand too much, pressure builds beneath the surface. The same machinery that creates greatness can also create collapse. That is why the story of the Terracotta Army still matters today, because it is not only about ancient China, it is about the timeless relationship between power, wealth, labor, and control. And that relationship continues to shape the world even now.